And welcome to this workers' rights convening about shining a light on employer violations of workers' rights. This convening is hosted by the Office of New York City Comptroller Brad Lander and by the NYU Wagner Labor Initiative, which I'm the director of. My name is Terry Gerstein. As I said, I accidentally moved this forward. As I said, I'm the director of the NYU Wagner Labor Initiative, which is based at NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. The Labor Initiative helps government work more effectively for workers, focusing on enforcement and policy, especially at the state and local level. And previously, I know many of you from many years in which I worked enforcing labor laws in New York State at the AG's office and New York State Department of Labor. We are so excited to have all of you here with us today. I think this is going to be a really lively and very substantive conversation about something that we don't talk about as much, which is using databases, disclosure, publicity as a way of empowering workers, deterring violations, and helping bring about a culture of compliance. So we're going to talk about some public databases. We're going to talk about publicity. I'll just give a quick summary of some of the topics that we're going to talk about today in terms of the ways that databases and disclosure and publicity help empower workers and deter violations. They help address the imbalance of information between workers and employers because an employer knows their own record of violations, right? But a worker or a job seeker has no way of knowing what the history of their employer is. These kinds of databases help incorporate labor issues into government procurement processes, licensing and permitting, and allow the agencies that do this work to take labor into account in those processes. It helps level the playing field for law-abiding employers who do the right thing and are often at a disadvantage because they're not getting the cost savings of cheating. It helps the public and it helps policymakers understand the scope of the problem and understand the extent of resources that are needed to address the problem. It allows scholars to study trends. It helps journalists who are reporting on worker exploitation issues to be able to report on things more in real time without having to wait months for freedom of information requests. And it helps workers feel more comfortable reporting violations. So we're here in New York City at NYU in Greenwich Village, but we do have people joining us on Zoom from across the country, from Minnesota and Oregon, Massachusetts and Maryland. So all of you on Zoom, I want to welcome you as well. These conversations obviously have national relevance, and we hope that what we talk about sparks ideas that will not only flower here in New York, but also in many places across the country. And also this conversation has relevance in areas beyond labor, even though that's our focus today. This kind of public disclosure and publicity as a tool is something that is helpful in many, many fields. So a few quick administrative items. One is that we're recording this conversation. Another is you have a program with speakers' bios, so we're not going to use unlimited time going through lengthy introductions. Each of the speakers is totally amazing. If they could stand here and talk for 2 hours, it would not get boring. But we are going to stick to relatively top-level issues in the interest of time. And above all, we really hope that this convening sparks both ideas and action, helping improve the lives of workers and communities. So I'm going to turn it over to our co-host, New York City Comptroller Brad Lander. Brad, as many of you know, was a champion for workers during his time in the New York City Council, spearheading efforts to pass, for example, Fair Work Week and paid sick leave laws and laws protecting fast food workers. As a comptroller, he's continued this commitment, enforcing prevailing wage laws, using leverage as a shareholder and leading shareholder efforts related to workers' rights at major national corporations. He established the office's first ever director of workers' rights, Claudia Enriquez. And now he and his team have created this new dashboard and wall of shame. So he is really a leader nationally in this area, not just here in New York City. Brad, thank you for your leadership, and I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. Let's hear it for Terry Gerstein. this center here at NYU, bringing the power of academia and students and other researchers together with her great experience and history fighting for workers in New York and now all across the country. It has already become a great place for people to share ideas. Last time I was at an event here, we had Attorney General Keith Ellison, and it's really exciting what is happening here. And we also get this beautiful room, so thank you. It's gorgeous to be here. Let's see a little bit who's in it. Terry mentioned a lot of the different kinds of people that are going to be able to use this tool. So let's see, who's here from organized labor, from a labor union? How many of you were out in the rain on Saturday at the parade? That was a lot of fun, rain notwithstanding. It was really great to be out there with all of you. You can feel the energy of the organizing drives of the last couple of years. So to everybody who's a worker, who's an organizer, who's working in a labor union to support working people in all kinds of ways. We're figuring out how to use a new database tool to getting out in the street for the Labor Day parade, and especially for organizing in those shops and businesses where workers are working together to make better working conditions and pay and dignity. Props to all of you and happy belated Labor Day. Who is here from government agencies, enforcement agencies? We're very excited about that. Do we have some immigrants' rights and workers' rights advocates in the room? A great partnership with all of you guys. And who's here from academia, NYU, CUNY, Cornell, Columbia. All right, we see you. Thanks guys for being here. And I know because we have some of them on our panels today that we have some great investigative journalists who are digging in and making sure these stories really get lifted up and told. Let's hear it for all of them. We've got a really great event today that's going to be very collaborative. A lot of great speakers, but a lot of great people here already thinking about how we do this work together. So I'm really excited about it, and I hope it'll continue to spark discussion and prompt some new ideas, to spur organizing, to inform policy efforts, because there's a lot more we can do, and to forge connections between our organizations that'll help make New York City the best place in the country for people to thrive at work, but also to learn other ideas from what people are doing across the country and help them grow, because we of course want this to take place everywhere. Let's see, I gave a big thank you to Terry. I want to thank everybody else here at NYU who helped get us set up this morning. And then I really, speaking of workers, want to thank the incredible crew from the Controller's Office. We've got a lot of us here this morning, I think out in the hall, our special events team, Alia, Liz, Jasper, and Naz, the folks doing the facilities work, Liz and Gerald, our comms and AV team, Derek, Iman, and Mikey. Give it up for all of them, please. Our Executive Deputy Controller, Sandra Abelis, is here, and this work is so important in our office that the person who leads our audits and contracting and administration is also someone who previously led the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. This stuff is very close to the heart of our office. And last but certainly not least, our workers' rights team and Bureau of Labor Law staff are all over this event, working with Terry to dream it up, working to build out this great dashboard and putting the event together. So big thank yous to them, to Allison and Macarena, and then I want to especially say a huge thanks to Claudia Enriquez, our Director of Workers' Rights, who really has taken what was a good shop full of people fighting hard to make sure prevailing wages are respected into something that is working to provide support for workers all across the city, has already returned over $8 million to hundreds of workers where prevailing wages were stolen. Yeah, it's worth clapping for that. And so many other ways. I want to give a big shout out, though she's probably running around, to Rebecca Lynch, who was running around with me at the parade on Saturday and is the linchpin of building the partnerships we have with so many of you. And in just a minute, I'm going to give a big shout out to Matan Diner, who's the one who built this great database tool. You'll hear more about him in just a minute. We have people from not just New York City, but actually all across the country, from folks in labor advocacy, journalism, and government. And their profiles are all in this great program, and you're going to hear from more of them. But a few of them traveled, and I'm going to say a thank you to the folks who traveled to be here. So thank you to Robert Asaro Angelo, the Commissioner in New Jersey Department of Labor and Workforce Development. Thank you for coming. To Jenny Yang, former chair of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Thank you for being here. And Brendan Butler, who wins the farthest travel award. He's from San Diego, the director of the San Diego County Office of Ethics, Compliance, and Labor. Thank you very much for coming across the country. As Terry mentioned, the importance of disclosure of workplace violations is just a great tool to support workers, to change workplaces, to build better public policy, and deter future violations. There's a lot of great evidence about how well it works. And it's worth taking one step back, because, there's 11 employers on our wall of shame. There's about 4,600 in the database. Now, that's only about 2% of the employers in New York City as a whole. So, of course, the majority of workplaces are not places of persistent labor violation, but too often in our workplaces, employers skirt the laws that have been set up to keep people safe, to make sure they get paid fairly, that they're protected, and that their rights are protected. Protecting workers' rights, therefore, requires workers who organize, it requires strong enforcement by agencies, and it requires transparency. And as Terry and other scholars have found in their research, disclosing violations of labor law, and when necessary, shaming violators, helps to increase compliance with the law. One example is Matthew Johnson's Regulation by Shaming, Deterrence Effects of Publicizing Violations of Workplace Health and Safety Laws, which proved that OSHA's press releases alone, in addition to their, they were already doing enforcement, where they do press releases, when they started doing press releases, it increases compliance with OSHA standards. Transparency matters, not just on that day, but increasing compliance more broadly. So that's why when I was running for controller, it dug in on the role the controller's office has in enforcing the prevailing wages and in gathering and making data transparent in New York City. I thought, what a great opportunity to bring different sources of data together, focus on New York City employers, and make a one-stop shop for transparency and accountability. So we have this incredible new employer violations dashboard, an easily searchable tool that displays information on wage theft, on OSHA violations, on unfair labor practices, discrimination and harassment, and failure to provide safe and sick leave, and even a few more things than that. And thanks to the team really putting it together in such a strong way. First, I want to give a big thanks to some of our other agency partners, because it wouldn't have been possible without New York State Department of Labor working with us to provide some information, with the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. There are some data sources in the dashboard that you can't get in total anywhere else. So it's not only that we're consolidating information in one place, but bringing some information forward that was available for an individual company by FOIL, but not in total at all. So that's really exciting. It means you can search a company. Yeah, all right, we'll clap for that. And then in addition to being able to search, any New York City employer and see, are there unfair labor practices? Do they have paid safe and sick law violations? What about, and on. We then said, okay, well, who are unfortunate top of the charts here, who have the most unfair labor practices or the most OSHA violations? And it's no surprise, some of the names up there, you're not going to be surprised to see Uber or Lyft or Chipotle or Gucci, or some of you that are working in home health care or construction. The bad actors you were already aware of come up top of the list. It's also not a surprise that there unfortunately is overlap where one employer will be in a couple of categories. So I'll just use the example of Chipotle, who are the biggest violator of the city's Fair Work Week laws, so our municipal obligations. But then, because there are workers organized to try to enforce their rights, turn around and in that case are at the top of the charts as well on unfair labor practices. And so in addition to the searchable database, there is an employer wall of shame right now with 11 companies who as we dug in, are at the top, either in an individual category or crossing over between a couple of categories. And what we hope is that they'll pay attention and decide next year they don't want to be on the top of the wall of shame, and they get right with their workers. And I'll just end by pointing out how important it is to make this something that's really collaborative for purposes of organizing and moving public policy forward. There's a lot of folks who can use this. You know, you can use it if you're an agency procurement officer and you want to make sure when you're signing a new contract that you're not contracting with people who are violating New York City's laws and abusing its workers. You can use it if you're a customer and you're thinking, all right, well, I'm going to make some decisions about who I use or who I shop with or what contractors I use. But really, we know that the key to making change in the workplace is workers organizing. And so what we're hoping it will be is a tool for building partnerships, not only because transparency is great, shining a spotlight is great, those OSHA press releases are great, the database is great, but what really makes change is when a tool can be used in partnership. So when you're starting an organizing drive, you have the ability to say to an agency that's considering that contractor, do you see where they are in the employer violations dashboard? And we can use all of our tools together in order to make sure that we can not just call employers out who are violating their workers, but make real change so that the workers in New York City get the pay and the safety and the workplace conditions and the rights and the dignity that all workers deserve. And that's why we did this, and that's why we're so thrilled that you're here. I'm excited to listen to today's panels, which are going to really highlight that. You'll learn a little more about what other tools and data is out there and how this can be used in partnership with them. And you're also going to hear later on, especially I think in panel number 3, from some great case studies of people who have deployed tools like this across the country in either organizing drives for change or policy efforts to make it so that laws were changed that make sure that our workplaces are the ones.
Oh, there we go. Now it's on. Perfect. Good morning, everyone. So I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough this morning of the dashboard and go over some of the core functionalities and what you can do with it, and would love to, after this, engage in more conversations with everyone about how we can use it to support your organizing or other work that you're doing. So the employer violations dashboard tracks workplace violations from 2020 to 2023, specifically in New York City. So when you go on the dashboard, you land on this About page. It explains why we did this dashboard and some of the key parameters as well, and the specific laws that we are tracking violations of. And the key parameter, there are a bunch of parameters, but the key thing to note here is that we focused here just on private sector workers specifically, but there are some private sector workers who do receive government contracts or are doing public works projects. But so one of the core pieces of the dashboard is the violations tab itself. And what you'll see here are charts that go through each of the different sections that we document data of. So You'll see here the sections are workplace safety, so OSHA violations, wage theft, which is wages unpaid, unfair labor practices, illegal union busting by during organizing campaigns, discrimination and harassment, local NYC labor laws, so that's violations of the Fair Workweek Law and paid safe and sick leave law, along with the prevailing wage cases that we handle in our office at the comptroller, here at the comptroller's office. I'm not going to go through all the different sections, but I'll just walk you through one just to get a general sense of what it all looks like. But if you see here, so I'll use OSHA as an example. So in each of the sections, we have a description of the issue and the specific agencies involved with enforcing the law and some explaining how the violations work on this. And so, as you'll see here, on many of these charts, we have some type of metric threshold, so you won't see every violating employer in all the charts. You will in the full data set, as was mentioned before. So example here with OSHA violations, we only included willful violations for New York City employers, but if you go into the data, you'll see more than just willful violations. You'll see other types like repeat and serious and other. And as I mentioned before, we have these two time frames, 2023 and the previous 3 years, 2020 to 2022. So here you can toggle between the two. And then in most of these sections, we do have, we also have notes about the source and other parameters. One other quick one, I'm not going to go through all of them as I mentioned, just to quickly show. In our wage theft section, we have these nice charts that show state DOL cases in terms of how much workers were owed, along with US DOL as well. And then I'll just jump around. If you go into the resources tab, you can see where you can download the full data set and see the full data. I'm not going to do that right now, but you can see how it's structured pretty similar to how the charts are structured themselves. On the resources tab, we also include links to where you can file complaints if you are a worker or represent a worker and you hear of an illegal practice that's going on. We have the links directly here for all the agencies that we pulled data from. One of the most exciting parts is our employer search. So here you can search a specific company. So we'll use our favorite example, which is Chipotle. And you can see that when you pull it up, you can see the specific type of violation that they were found to have committed. And then we have a little guide here as to where you can find this information. So where it says data set, that means you can go, it's just in the data set. If it says violation/data set, it means you can see the information in the violations tab as well. And lastly, we have our employer wall of shame, which was mentioned. And as was mentioned, these are companies that are at the top of a lot of those charts that were seen before. And if you go in here, we provide the specific reason why they are. I'll snooze this. Why they are on the wall of shame. And then if you open it up, you can read a little bit more of a description about the specific violations and then other overlapping violations, along with added on research that we brought in that provides a little more context as to who these employers actually are and the violations themselves. And so, yeah, and that's the core of it. The last thing I'll say again is I would love to talk to anyone after this event to try to engage with you and see how we can help bring the dashboard to your work. And because we want to make this tool to be useful to people promoting workers' rights. So now I'll pass it on back to Terry.
Yes. I was just thinking we should use the.
Yeah, I tested them already. There you go.
Thank you. Can people hear me? Is the mic? Oh, here we go. So I'm going to stand here because we've received word that the people on Zoom are just seeing this area and they're not seeing the podium. So Jenny, if it's okay, if you could speak over here as well. So I am really excited to introduce, so first of all, Matan, that was amazing. And let's just give Matan another hand for that incredible work that he did setting up the database. And I think we really need more of this kind of tool throughout I think it's phenomenal, and I think it's going to make a really big difference in New York, and I think we need more of these throughout the country as well, and this can really serve as a model for other cities and states. So I'm going to introduce, our next speaker is Jenny Yang. We're so lucky to have her here with us today. Most recently, Jenny served in the White House Domestic Policy Council as Deputy Assistant to the President for Racial Justice and Equity. Before that, she headed the OFCCP, the Office of Federal Contracts Compliance Programs at the U.S. Department of Labor from the start of the Biden administration, and she was also the chairperson of the EEOC during the Obama administration. And we're really lucky to have her here with us today, and she's just going to share some thoughts about public disclosure and databases in relation to her experience enforcing laws at the federal level. So Jenny, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Terry, for that introduction and for inviting me to join you at this really exciting conversation. I want to congratulate New York City Controller Brad Lander for your leadership here. It is really meaningful to have an official government source of violations that the federal government can look to as well as we identify potential pattern or practice or systemic violations, as well as investigate particular charges or think about the kinds of actions the federal government might bring on its own initiative. So what I wanted to share briefly with you today is what are some of the limitations on federal data? Why doesn't the federal government do this already? Wouldn't that be great? And then how have we used data in identifying systemic patterns? And I wanted to share a little bit about some of the data that OFCCP has made available recently on demographic information of federal contractor employees. So first, from the EEOC standpoint, there are statutory limitations on what the agency can share. So pre-litigation resolutions, or EEOC is charged with investigating every charge and making a finding and determining whether there's reasonable cause to believe discrimination occurred. That finding is not made public, and it is required to be confidential by statute. So there was an effort, many of you are probably familiar with the Fair Pay Safe Workplaces Act, to collect information for the purpose of federal contracting that the federal government could use itself, right? And that was ultimately enjoined, rescinded. There was a Congressional Review Act effort, and the Trump administration withdrew that. But there have been efforts to collect information for procurement, but not to make it public, right? And there are often other statutory limitations. The same with the Office of Federal Contract Compliance, which I led at the start of this administration, which enforces affirmative action and anti-discrimination requirements for federal contractors, and that they employ about 20% of the American workforce. What OFCCP does is schedule audits of typically large federal contractors, and the agency has the authority to request data on hiring demographics, on pay, on promotion, and a broad array of employer practices. Employers are required to do a self-analysis to see where there may be barriers to equal opportunity, where there are barriers to set targets, just aspirational goals, to try to address them. And so in the past, OFCCP has relied on data from other areas. So within DOL, we've looked at OSHA, workplace violations, DOL, wage and hour violations, to understand, what are problematic employers that may have not invested sufficiently in their compliance operations. And we saw that to have significant correlations with employment discrimination as well. So we have explored using different data sets to try to understand. It is a bit sometimes like of a needle in a haystack, right? Many employers are really doing a good job trying to comply, but then there are more outliers that are systemically violating a number of different statutes, right? So I think this data could be an important source as the agency, I still say we, but the OFCCP publishes its scheduling methodology, the data that it considers in scheduling employers for audits. EEOC has directed investigation authority or commissioner charge authority. So even without an individual charge, if it learns of a problem, a practice problem, a systemic problem, the agency can, on its own initiative, under Title VII, commissioners can open a charge to investigate a matter on the same basis that an individual might file a charge. So learning about information from this database could be the source of a charge. The EEOC also has directed investigation authority under the Equal Pay Act and the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. So if it learns about a pay problem, it can just open an investigation, and you do need some information typically to do that. And so having ready information about violations at the city level and more broadly can be a helpful starting place for federal agencies to tackle larger problems. And I'll just end with sharing, I know we have some investigative reporters. Do we have anyone from the CIR, the Center for Investigative Reporting here? Well, they filed a FOIA action against OFCCP demanding the release of federal contractors' demographic data that is collected by OFCCP in a joint collection with EEOC. EEOC's collection is considered confidential, and there are criminal penalties by statute for releasing it. But because OFCCP has independent collection authority, it's a different standard, and the statute doesn't apply. So OFCCP embarked on a process asking employers, do you object for us to disclose this information? Typically, the agency would defend objections as commercial information, right? Maybe you could see somebody's business plans or operation understanding demographics. So the agency lost a district court decision finding that actually it's not commercial. This is just broad demographic information company-wide. It's race, gender, ethnicity of workers nationwide by job category. So service and maintenance workers, first level employees. And that's data that's often used to identify, could there be a broader pattern, right? The data itself doesn't prove discrimination, but it gives you an opportunity to say, is there something more we need to investigate, right? So the agency has released, it's available on its FOIA website, 19,000 contractors, EO1 data, so that demographic information, which typically has not been available other than federal contractors, particularly in the tech industry and others, have more recently willingly disclosed that information. So there has been a shift in understanding about whether that information is important and whether it's confidential. So I just wanted to flag that for you all to stay tuned. But really happy to engage with anyone if you have questions about the federal governments. I'm teaching here at NYU now, so I'll be in town. But I'm really excited to see this and happy to have this opportunity to share how I think the federal government could really benefit from this data as well. Thanks so much.
All right, so we'll have our first panel come up. These are the discussion about some non-governmental databases and efforts to disclose and highlight employer violations. Is Charlie here? Yes. Wait. Oh, here we go. Everybody's here. Yay. Okay, great.
And while folks get settled, some of you may have seen some flyers on your seats from Law 360. We had one of the workers from Law 360 here. They have authorized a strike and might go out on strike soon, and they had to run out for more organizing, but appreciate all the solidarity and support that we could extend if they do have to go on strike. Great. Thank you so much.
I was just going to stand. Is it better for me to stand? There's another mic over there. Yeah. Oh, we can't because it's where the Zoom, like the people who are watching the Zoom can't see what's over there. So I'm just going to stand here. Okay. So I think Greg wants to put this. You can sit there. You can sit there. Okay. Oh, I prefer to stand if that's okay. If it doesn't make everyone off. It's like I'm so short. Like. Huh? They have a mic over here. Do you think it's too awkward?
Whatever you think, whatever feels good to you.
This is fine. Okay.
Is there a specific place we should be sitting?
No, I think you guys are in the right order. testing. Yeah, I'll pass it around. Yeah, that's okay. All right. So when it's your turn, I'll just have you do a, okay. Get started. All right, ooh, that's loud. We are going to get started with panel 1. Thank you, everyone. All right, my name is Claudia Enriquez. I work for the Office of the Comptroller as the Director of Worker Rights. I'll be moderating our first panel, which is focusing on non-governmental actors that are producing data that highlights employer violations. Our distinguished panelists come from organizations outside of the government sphere that have created databases or lists, and you will hear about the value of these tools highlighting employer violations and media coverage to that effect. A few words about our speakers. Our first one will be Marcus Baram, who's a reporter at Documented and ProPublica and has also worked for a number of other news outlets, including the New York Daily News and the Wall Street Journal. In 2021, he was awarded a grant and a fellowship to write and report on a 4-part series about the erosion of the overtime wage rules. In 2014, he published a biography of the late Gil Scott-Heron, which was found a notable book, or named a notable book by The New Yorker. Marcus will be talking to us today about the Documented ProPublica Wage Theft Monitor that was released in August of 2023. Our second panelist, Greg Leroy, founded Good Jobs First, which is a research and policy center that promotes corporate and government accountability and has been called the leading national watchdog of state and local economic development subsidies. He has authored The Great American Jobs Scam, Corporate Tax Dodging and Myth of Job Creation, and No More Candy Stores, States and Cities Making Job Subsidies Accountable. Today, Greg will speak about Good Jobs First Violations Tracker database, which aggregates records such as workplace rights violations, wage theft, pension abuses, sex and race discrimination, and unfair labor practices from 450 federal, state, and local agencies. And finally, Charlie Uroshima from NICOSH is an organizer, cultural worker, audiovisual producer, and musical curator. He, in 2014, co-founded Quechua Haratari, the first Quechua radio project in the US. He's worked with grassroots organizations in New York City, such as Democracy Now!, New Immigrant Community Empowerment, or NICE, and band workers. Currently at NICOSH, he coordinates the Manhattan Justice for Workers Collaborative, a citywide workers' rights initiative. And Charlie will be speaking about National COSH's Dirty Dozen, a list that highlights companies that puts workers and communities at great risk due to their unsafe practices. So with that, I will turn it over to the panelists for a first question, which is a 3-part question, which is tell us about your database or your list. Why did you or your organization decide to put it together, and how did you go about creating it? So Marcus, you are first.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to Terry for convening this important panel. And I also just want to give a lot of credit and thanks to Max Siegelbaum, who's here in the audience, who's the editor of Documented, who brought me in for this project. So I had been doing the overtime wage reporting for a news nonprofit called Capital in Maine, and then was brought in to kind of take on this wage theft reporting because Max had filed a FOIL request with the Department of Labor to get wage theft violation data. And unfortunately, all too often, as happens in New York, and you were rebuffed, and we had to fight like a 2-year legal battle to get this data, basic data that's, taxpayers sort of are owed this type of data from the government. And then finally got the database, and it was limited, and there was a lot of questions about it. It was very spare, as you often get, and odd acronyms, and it took a while to get the explanations and definitions of each acronym and what that meant and how the different columns related to each other. It was just one big Excel spreadsheet. And we had to actually go back, and then they gave us a more updated database, but then we discovered major discrepancies between the original database and the new database. even for the same years. It was very confusing. And then we got ghosted by the Department of Labor for several months, which was a very pleasant experience. I even had to bring in the governor's office, I think, to like kick their asses a little bit. It was very disheartening, but also I think a lesson, not just for journalists, but I think just for the public at large, or advocates, obviously, just to be persistent, just to like keep pushing and pushing, be the squeaky wheel, be annoying. Doesn't matter what they say about you behind your back, just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And then we finally got some of these questions answered and produced our first stories. Max wrote one story, I wrote one story that showed that 129,000 workers in New York have been victims of wage theft over a 5-year period. So that's only 5 years. And that is like a drop in the bucket compared to the actual number of victims. And then we found, my story was about how almost $80 million in back wages were owed to workers, still owed. And usually it was pending, and the employers just hadn't followed through, and there were very few legal tools to get them to respond. In any case, part of the intention of the project was to put together a database that the public could use, because the DOL did have, for a very brief period in the Cuomo years, from I think 2011 to 2012, they actually had a public online database. And then for some odd reason, like in a step backwards in transparency, they took it down. And never really explained why. The explanation was always like, oh, it was above my pay grade. Someone made the decision. And so they took that down, which is bizarre. And so we had to create our own database, which was, involved, culling all that information from the database that we received from the DOL, which include the basics about, obviously, employers, their address, the industry sector they were in, what specifics of the violation. When it comes to wage theft, it could be overtime wages, it could be minimum wage violations, and the amount of back wages that were determined to be owed, and then what was actually had been paid back, and what was sort of still pending. So it was very exciting to publish that and to have that available, and to have a map too, which also made it very easy for people to look at. Yeah, where you could look at your exact neighborhood and see who are the wage theft violators in your neighborhood, which makes it very real. Like, I think one of the ways that we promoted our story when I was reporting it, because it took about a year of reporting, was in my neighborhood in Park Slope, Brooklyn. We found that the #1 restaurant at the time in the entire state was like the local diner, which owed Dizzy's Diner, which owed about $1 million. You know Dizzy's, everyone knows Dizzy's. Did they? And what happened? All right, there we go, scoop. No. So, but that opened people's eyes though in the neighborhood, because I would like talk about the project and people kind of like, okay, what's wage theft? And then you mention, oh, you know who the #1 violator is? You'll never guess. And people were like, oh, probably some big construction company, or they'd name Chipotle or Amazon, and it was Dizzy's, which is kind of shocking to people. So that made people aware of what happens. And then actually following up with the reporting on Dizzy's, it wasn't the front of the restaurant people, the waiters. It was the guys in the kitchen, most of whom were undocumented, who were the victims. And it was about 30 of them who were still owed about $1 million in total. So that was a real eye-opener. In any case, it was great to have that available, and that's the kind of thing you could see by looking at the map or looking at the database. And it's very gratifying to see the controller's database and this wall of shame, which always reminds me of the Village Voices old slumlord list, which was also very effective and got a lot of attention at the time. So anyways, with that.
Greg Leroy from Good Jobs First. Thanks so much for switching back, and if somebody can go to the source list for us. So Violation Tracker is 9 years old, and it's a very big Hoover. It captures regulatory, many county DAs if they do white-collar crime. We don't do individual crimes, but corporate crimes of all sorts. We've also had Violation Tracker in the UK for 3 years now, and next month we're going to unveil Violation Tracker Global, which will span more than 40 countries. Yeah, so thank you. you know, it has more than 640,000 cases, capturing more than $1 trillion worth of penalties. We have a very sophisticated parent-subsidiary matching system, so you can look up Berkshire Hathaway and see all of its tentacles, for example, or, and we give you the parent at the time of the violation as well as every subsequent ownership structure of the company up to today, in case that matters in terms of political donations or other shenanigans going on by the company at the time. We also have private litigation, class action litigation. I'm really glad that some of that's gotten imported into the database here, covering New York City workers. It's really great to see that. We also want to acknowledge Brandon Butler and his dashboard in San Diego, which we featured already on our website, and I know he's going to speak soon, but we love the fact that more public officials are doing these because, look, we know we've got a very heavy user database. We know that OSHA field offices started using it like 3 months after it got unveiled, because the parent-subsidiary matching system allows you to figure out who the recidivists are, who the bad guys are right away, which matters a lot, right? But having the imprimatur of a local public official in San Diego, in New York, other places, matters a lot in terms of user acceptance, employer use, compliance, the idea of spreading this to procurement, enforcement, and debarment of bad companies in the procurement space. We think that's a really vital area. We have lots of academic users. More than 260 academics have licensed complete sets of the data from us in just the last 2 years. More than 60 academic articles have already been published using this data. We've gotten, we have about 15 for-profit ESG investment advisory firms that now use the data from us. I'd like to acknowledge Chris Wallace, standing here, our outpost, helping publicize this on Wall Street. It's getting a lot of traction in that space. We think Violation Tracker Global will be the next hot spot for them. I should also acknowledge that Phil Matera, our research director, who couldn't be here today, is the mastermind of all of our databases, including all 3 of the violation trackers. And together with our programmer, Rich Pichalski, he has really created this incredible open source tool that's been so widely used for so long. One union special projects director who heavily uses it basically says, we think of Violation Tracker like Westlaw and coffee. And I sort of dialed it up. So with that, I'm just going to quickly show you, you see the federal sources here, and go down, you can see every office of the U.S. Department of Justice, for example, and the data goes back to the year 2000. This is 24 years of data. So that's why the numbers are so big in terms of the number of cases and the number of every federal regulator. And then if you look at the state sources here, real quick, sorry about that. You can click on any state to see all the regulators there, or, you know, California's got a lot of regulators and lots of counties prosecuting white-collar crime, so that one scrolls on for a long way. So we've got it all. It's a big Hoover. We welcome everybody's use of it and welcome your feedback. Here you go. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie. I am from NICOSH, New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health. Today, also representing National COSH, the National Council for Occupational Safety and Health, which I sit on the executive board of. So, the Dirty Dozen basically is a report that we put out annually in April during Workers' Memorial Week. It's basically a list of a dozen worst employers on a national scale. How do we get this information? Has been over the past decade about basically talking to organizers, talking to our COSH groups, COSH affiliates, which we have about 26 nationally. And really how National COSH sees it is as an organizing tool. You know, it's like the oldest, it's the oldest tactic in the organizer's playbook, right? You name and shame. And so this is one of the ways in which we really try to do this. And in 2022 specifically, I was involved in one of these organizing pushes against a company named Refresco. This is actually, that's, well, all right. I'll start 2022, the Refresco, I'm gonna stand up because I can barely see it. The Refresco workers, it's basically a beverage plant in New Jersey. It's the largest independent beverage bottling company in the country. It's a multinational country. It's a multinational corporation. It was named in a 2022 Dirty Dozen report, which really amplified media attention towards this issue, the violations, health and safety violations. Workers pretty much were forced to work 12 hours, 12-hour days every single day, 7 days a week during the pandemic, during COVID. And imagine that they were given 1 day off, 1 day in a weekend off, every 8 weeks. Imagine that. So basically, they were giving like 8 days off a year almost, right? So workers got fed up because workers were also getting sick at work. They weren't allowed to take sick time off. Even during the height of the pandemic, when people knew it was highly contagious, they were asked to come into work, just wear masks, and everything would be fine. And the employer wasn't even providing these masks, right? The workers had to come with their own masks. So 2022, so 2021, they looked to organize. They organized with the United Electrical Workers Union. They voted to unionize twice, actually, because the first time the employer basically didn't want to. They found some technicality that the NLRB official was 5 minutes late to the union vote, and so they had to go back to the drawing boards and vote again. They voted twice to enter into a union, and during the second time they got into it, they voted for the union. The private equity firm at that moment who took over ownership, KKR, did not want to sit in good faith with workers. So we put them in a Dirty Dozen report. Refresco workers basically benefited by this media attention because they were also exposed. The owners of the company were exposed, especially the newer owners, KKR, which is a private equity firm that gets money from pension funds. So we actually sat with the folks from the New York City Comptroller's office. You know, we raised the issue of investing in these pension funds that are violating worker rights. And that paired with the media attention, paired with the organizing tactics like direct action at the workplace, at KKR's offices, all that amounted to increased pressure, which eventually, and the Change.org petition, eventually KKR came to the table in 2023 and in May 2023, and finally workers were able to get a fair contract.
Grateful to be on this panel. This tool is really exciting, and I want to go back to something that Marcus said earlier when he was talking about getting phone calls from workers and sort of identifying the issues that are going on. So often our team meets people, and they are coming to us because they're saying, hey, we didn't get paid for the last month of work, the last 3 months of work, the last 6 months of work. And then we're like, okay, yeah, we're going to work on getting that money for you. And it's sometimes a little bit of shame that comes through our office doors as if they're not supposed to be advocating for themselves. They don't want to be saying much about what's going on in their workspace, and they feel like they're whining or complaining. And then I speak with a worker, and I'm like, sure, how much do they owe you? Oh, well, I was getting paid $450 a week for 72 hours of work. And so we're looking at like $6.25 an hour. And kind of unpacking and telling them about what's going on. And they're coming to you for a very acute issue, but they really are kind of sort of opening Pandora's box. And I bring this up because a tool like this one, it was really great to see Matan kind of give a demonstration earlier, where the narrative is there. And so what's happening here, we're talking about data a lot today, but these are people. These points are people. And so what is happening there is that they come forward and they're like, oh yeah, I'm just here for money, about like the specific money. And then I can read a narrative like this that's already published and talk to them about, is this also going on in your website? Is this also happening? And they're like, oh yeah, of course. But that happens to the other workers who get paid too. And like who are getting paid the last 6 months. And so they're not even realizing the plethora of issues that are happening in the workplace. And this is emotionally supportive. Just to one worker, this provides a lot of emotional support. And to our organizing team, it's able to open up a conversation and politically activate someone to realize that they want to speak up on behalf of their worksite as well. So I just kind of wanted to take a step back and talk a little bit about Marcus opening that door. And that's a huge part of what we're doing. And we get to talk with our organizing team and encouraging people to want to step forward. And we're like, actually, this isn't just happening to you. This has been going on at this worksite since this time. And they're like, really? They're like, oh. And we have workers who come in who have been there with, they come in and they're like, I worked with this guy for 2 days on a construction site. And then he's bringing in the person that he worked in for the last 2 days with that construction, from the period that the first one started. And so we're now looking at a span of 1.5 years of workers coming in from short periods. And these databases really help people come to life. They're coming forward and they're saying, hey, we need to talk about these issues. It's not just me. And it's not just $1,000. It becomes 40 workers and millions of dollars. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight that and take that step back, and that's part of what this sort of database does for us. It does kind of bring emotion and healing in certain ways for our workforce and allow people to get politically activated in what's happening in their workspace. So that was one of the first things. And then what's also very exciting is that it allows us as advocates to sort of see different work sites and employers who are connected that we didn't know originally. So a little while back ago, Make the Road did a campaign for car wash workers, and our organizing team, bless them, they actually were identifying folks in different locations, had no idea it was the same employer. So this allows us to also start doing some joint employment identification that really can be better for enforcement purposes, that allows us to flag for our partner agencies and allied agencies, hey, actually, we know about this worker, we know about this subcontractor, this is what's happening. So we eventually, in the car wash workers, were able to identify an employer across 5 different boroughs, and it was the same employer. So we had all these different people in 5 boroughs, and then we identified that it was the same exact employer. And a database like this would really make that happen much more quickly. And then I also want to bring up that this is a great tool for us to be able to speak with the agency. When you have these transparency tools, we are realizing how the agency looks at things, what they're thinking about for their data overlay, and then we can ask them about the data overlay that brings narratives to life. So we can say, actually, can you do an overlay, or have you thought about doing an overlay about the complainants and where they're coming from? What kind of equal protection is happening for these workers, or what's going on? So that's another data point that's really key, and we can kind of talk about, oh, this is where our perspectives are missing each other, and we can actually meet at this port in the middle. And then finally, I'll say that we're really excited about this because Make the Road has been leading a charge regarding prosecutorial discretion for workers, and so Una and I get the opportunity to work together in certain spaces. I'm lucky. And so what we end up doing is we can talk to each other. Hey, is there a statement of interest for this work site? So now this huge database, we can talk to each other. Actually, I already have a statement of interest, and these are the workers that I'm working with, and we can identify the industries and also the geographies that we need to really be approaching more carefully or thoughtfully in order to obtain statement of interest and get investigations really moving, and not just about one worker, but about full work sites seeking justice. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So Claudia Irizarry is a journalist at the nonprofit news outlet The City. And it's really an honor to be on a panel with you today. Your work as one of the top journalists covering labor and workers' rights issues has really stood apart as a key vehicle for uncovering terrible conditions of workers in the city, and often workers who otherwise most of the newspaper readership in New York City may not even think of every day. The definition of the invisible workforce in many ways. And you have a unique perspective on this panel because everyone else here is focusing on a specific sector of worker or demographic of worker, and your job is really to reach the entire broader public audience for the public good. So My question for you is, as a journalist, how do transparency tools like these, either from a government agency or from sources like Good Jobs First, help inform your work? Are there examples of a story or stories where a source like this was really helpful, or an example of a story where, man, you really wished you had something like this kind of database to inform the work?
Thank you, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, so happy to be here. I mean, for me in my role as a journalist, I mean, data, public disclosures are everything. Whether it's what leads me to find a work site, or leads me to find workers, or whether it's what corroborates what workers are telling me, organizers are telling me, or what I find in lawsuits, it's just extraordinarily crucial, and I rarely, if ever, publish a story where I'm not citing a type of record, whether it's simply the evidence that a complaint was filed with the DOL or OSHA or the NLRB, or simply, you know, evidence of just like the reflection of like a worker's pay stub. Like, it's extraordinarily crucial. I find often that workers appreciate when I ask them to back up what they're saying. They appreciate that I'm thorough. I would like to think that it shows that I take their concerns and their experiences seriously. So just for me, it's just like absolutely everything. Like, everything just goes back to give me a record, show me the goods. And you know, that's how you just get results. And I mean, in terms of just like, again, every single story I've written, I've had to cite a sort of record for a lot of different reasons. One really valuable reason is that it really helped me cut through the narrative, the official narrative, whether it's by the employer or even some of the workers, sometimes in really amusing ways. One such example was 2 years ago. There was a strike at the Starbucks Reserve Roastery on 9th or 8th Avenue. The workers were on strike for like 3 weeks because there was mold in the ice machine and bed bugs and all sort of like really gross pests and stuff. And Starbucks corporate was just denying. It got pretty ugly. They got pretty close in letters to the union of accusing the union of lying about the whole situation, even though they had pictures and they were out there and getting media coverage and all of that. And then one day I was out at the picket line, I was talking to workers, and one of them tells me, like, hey, like earlier this week we saw 2 guys show up in hazmat suits. They said they were with like the health inspector. We don't know why they were here. And I was like, oh, okay, did they give you a business card or something? Like, who were these people? I obtained a photo of 2 individuals in hazmat suits in front of the Reserve Roastery, so I know that they were actually there. And one of those folks gave one of the workers a business card, so that helped me identify which agency was there that day. And it was the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets. I simply reached out to them, asked them, hey, with the photo I had at the time, so I had the evidence of the day that they were there. So I asked them, hey, were you actually at the Reserve Roastery on this day? Did you do an inspection? Have you concluded an inspection, and can you give it to me? And they did, and it backed up almost all of the workers' complaints. And it was really valuable to be able to go back to Starbucks and just have them respond to something that wasn't coming from the union. Like, this is like the state, you know, this is like the state investigation. Like, you can't, like, please just like, you know, acknowledge this. And it was pretty amusing because when I first reached out to Starbucks, their initial response was to just give me the same boilerplate response they've been giving the media this whole time, responding to what the union has been saying, but not the actual results of that inspection. And I just had to go back at them and be like, hey, okay, so just so we're clear, like, this is an inspection that I got from the state. The union only saw it because I gave it to them the same way that I'm giving it to you. Are you going to respond to them, or are you just going to say that the union is continuing to lie? Are you implying that the state is lying? And very quickly, like, the messaging became like, oh, we are working with, you know, the state and trying to correct this, and we take concern seriously. And eventually, you know, the company agreed to overhaul its like health standards at all Reserve Roasteries nationwide. And it's just like a really amusing example. Like it wasn't necessarily a life or death situation, but it just shows the value of just, having that record and getting it by any means necessary. It does get results, and it really helps cut through the BS, frankly.
Stop passing the mic now. So, Debbie, you have to give that mic to Miranda. We're now going to take a little detour, actually, from the worker organizing at work sites and press to government policy reform and advocacy with our next speaker, Miranda Nelson. Miranda comes out of the labor movement as a researcher and campaigner with New York State Nurses Association, New York Hotel Trades Council, UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers, and now is the deputy director at Jobs to Move America, which is a policy organization that's working to ensure workers' issues are handled correctly within government and government procurement in particular, and raise standards across the country. And so, Miranda, can you talk a little bit about, sorry, I don't know if this is working, what data about workplace violations and contracts in your advocacy work with Jobs with America?
Sure. So, very, very thrilled to be here. Thrilled to be amongst a group that is really interested in the nitty-gritty details of procurement, because that is what I think about all the time, 24/7. So that's very applauding. So yeah, we, at Jobs to America, we think a lot about the effects of government money on workers and the ways in which government money can really lift up working standards, especially when they are doing their procurement. And I've heard a lot of folks here talk about construction. I think it's incredibly important for governments to really think about this in construction. We think a lot about manufacturing. Government is buying a whole lot of manufactured goods, and we think that government can be doing the same kinds of things of really trying to raise the floor around real standards for manufactured goods when they are buying them. That is a place that they really, really do not want to think about. We have found, because it feels too removed. So we are doing a whole lot of work to try to get these agencies to spend time thinking about manufacturing. And a tool that we have developed is something called the U.S. Employment Plan, where we get government agencies to ask companies proactively about the wages and working conditions that they intend to use on the contract that they are going to enter into for the goods that they are going to buy. And what they want is, what we're trying to get our governments to do is ask really detailed, specific information. What wages are you going to pay? What kinds of benefits are you going to deliver? What kinds of training do you plan to provide? How are you going to provide a safe workplace? Like, lots of detailed information like this. And then we want to get governments to reward the companies that are going to do the best, that have made the best plan. Let's give the government contracts to them. And then let's make that plan become a commitment in the contract, so that you can't just say, oh, we'll do better next time, as I heard Una say, or say, hey, yes, this is what we did in the past, but that's in the past. We're saying, right now, on this contract, this is what you're going to do, and now we need a commitment there. And let's enter that commitment into the contract so that any deviation from what you have committed to is a violation of the contract, and the government agency can hold them accountable to that violation. This comes with it a huge need for transparency, and if we have time, Alice and I hope that we can talk more about that, because what we have found is that manufacturers will make all sorts of commitments, and then the government agencies won't tell the public what those commitments are. And we really, really would like instead for the agencies to be doing the kinds of things the controller's office is doing, where they just put up on their website, here's what we got in this contract, here's what the commitments are. And then we are also asking for regular reporting. And I think a lot of these manufacturers are reporting to agencies, but the agencies are not making those reports public. We would like the reports to be public. Did you pay what you said that you were going to pay? if we take this information to workers, will the workers confirm that they are getting paid what you claim to be paying them? And so we think that that is a key part of getting accountability here and making this program really work. And in places where it has worked and where we've been successful, that has actually led to worker organizing. We have been able to hold, for example, we held a bus company accountable. We found that they were not, we had to go through a whole transparency fight with the company. And we had to take them to court and to take the agency to court to get lots of information from them. But in the end, we found out that they were not, in fact, reporting correct. They were not living up to the commitments that they had made, and then they were lying about what they were doing. And we were able to hold them accountable. And the result of that was we got a community benefits agreement that led to the workers at this factory in Alabama getting a union contract. And we're super thrilled about that. So we think that we get all the policy right, we can really lead to worker empowerment.
Thank you so much, Miranda. And then I'm going to hand it over to Debbie Wright, who is the National Political Director for our WDSU, the Retail Wholesale Department Store Union. Always almost get it right. And before that was the Political Director at UAW Region 9A. So Debbie, thank you so much for being here. And can you just talk a little bit about the retail industry in particular and how these kinds of databases and transparency helps the organizing and enforcement work that you all do at WDSU?
Yeah, happy to do it. And again, I'm also honored to be on this panel today with incredible women. So I just want to start out by saying and sort of, tying everything that we saw this morning together is it should shock nobody in this room that the #1 violator on that dashboard for unfair labor practices is Amazon, right? And although I agree that putting a spotlight on this is incredibly important for a whole host of reasons that we talked about today, right? You're talking about the validity of every single worker and what they've gone through in their own workplace or that particular workplace. You're talking about trying to piece together patterns of practice, right, and how we can actually use this type of data to then bring about policy change. You're talking about organizing drives, right, in terms of not only organizing new places, but making places better. Most times, I will agree that putting a spotlight on these employers is great for all of those reasons, and also hopefully deterring any type of future violation, not only from that employer, but from those in like industries. However, there are some corporations in this world who will wear the badge of abusing workers as a badge of honor. One of them is Amazon. And they feel that they can get away with whatever they want. And that's why it's also important to have these types of databases, so that way the members of the public, not just the workers themselves in Amazon and other places, but the members of the public who use Amazon all the time, remember that there are workers behind that order that gets quickly delivered to you and what's happening to them on an everyday basis, right? So that's why this is also extremely important. And I say that because for us, in the retail industry, right, you're talking about some of the lowest paid workers out in these stores who experience horrible things every single day. There are employers who don't really train them on how to deal with the public in different situations that can come up, right? And how they're exploited. And this way, I can say that as soon as this got launched last week, a couple of our organizers were immediately texting me saying, "Oh my God, Debbie, is this the dashboard that you were telling us about is coming up?" And I was like, yes. They're like, "Oh my God, we're already diving in. This is amazing." The reason why it's amazing is because in our organizing drives, we can now go back to these workers and show this to them and say, you're not alone. Even if your employer isn't on here yet, which I can tell you some of our ours, even if your employer isn't on here yet, you see other areas, right? Other workers who did come forward and actually filed complaints and what is now happening with those complaints. That's huge. It's huge. Because in organizing, the biggest piece of it is it's storytelling. of the most personal and vulnerable kind. And it takes incredible courage to be able to come out and say what's happening to you, right? Knowing that you can face retaliation, that you can face your losing your job or something else happening to you at work, right? Your livelihood. So having these databases and really being able to show this to workers makes, in some respects, the organizer's job easier, right? To try and say, you do have this community of interest out here, and this is why we're coming right forward to try and help you now fight to be able to get whatever it is happening resolved, and that's huge. The other reason why this is important, and even though it's happening in New York for us, we have 2 organizing drives and first contract fights happening around REI and Barnes & Noble, right? REI, supposedly a co-op. I can tell you, they do not operate as a co-op when it comes to organizing. We're not only organizing in New York, we're organizing in other parts of the country. Now we can say to those workers in Illinois, we can say to those workers in Ohio, hey, look at this for a second, right? Because I'll tell you, even though it has New York City on it, right? That employer is doing this across the United States. And now those workers can see, oh, wait a minute, yeah, wait, you guys were telling us something about this, right? Yes, look at this work and safety, right? Health and safety violations are huge throughout the retail industry in terms of what our members and non-unionized retail workers are forced to face every single day, right? That is huge. And so to be able to have this data and talk to them about it, what we can now do, right, on our side and how we can use this in our organizing drives is gonna help us, get across that finish line a lot easier. I also say that this is really helpful too because even though you have things like FOIA that's available to you, right? And in my former life, I started off in legal services, right? So as a former attorney, I can tell you, yeah, sure, I would love to dive deep in this and I can. For the average everyday worker, it's really hard to navigate those systems, right? Even for the union side, when we're trying to do it on our end, a lot of these employers are smart. They also have lawyers behind them, right? Who can tell them how to satisfy, right, a request with just the smallest amount of information, and they say, well, we're done, right? And now you're left with really not a lot of stuff on your side that you were hoping to get. So being able to pull this data out, right, of these databases, and then being able to use it maybe even for a more targeted FOIA request, which becomes a little bit harder then for the employer, right, to sort of move around, is incredibly helpful as well. So thank you, for actually putting this together, because again, this is going to make a huge difference for us.
So you can only 3 minutes left, and I'm going to use that 3 minutes. And I'm going to ask you guys to go around sort of one sentence quickly with the question that none of you have been prepared for, although Miranda sort of got us started, which is, we're all organizers, and our prior panel said you got to keep pushing for more, and I think we're constitutionally incapable of not pushing for more. So I want to end this panel by asking each of you if you could think of one way either the databases that exist could be improved or new data that would be helpful in the work that you do. If that government could release, what would it be?
So 2 quick things. One, online certified payrolls, electronic certified payrolls with redacted information made available to the public about local hire, et cetera, and demographic data. And the second is the Department of Buildings to actually publish every single subcontractor who has work on a job in real time so that that is trackable, because workers don't even know who they're working for often, and government doesn't even know either. It's ridiculous.
Una stole mine. I honestly, for identifying subcontractors is major for the work, because so often workers have no idea who they are working for. And I think really the other thing is, it's not so much just that the data, encouraging just keep publishing, because transparency is contagious, and it's really a wonderful thing to be able to, it saves us a ton of money in litigation on foils and resources that attorneys can use to helping workers. But I think the other thing is I know it's not a direct response, but sort of how are we going to get agencies to communicate with one another about their databases?
Yes.
the overlay of that information. Like, how do we get the Workers' Compensation Board to talk to OSHA or the local state PIP? Like, those sorts of things. This is really kind of, I think, the next step of really the communication across these databases.
I completely co-sign what you both have just said. I would say that it's not just about the information being available, it's about the average person knowing where to look. It's completely just inscrutable sometimes which agency inspects what and where that information is posted. And I would love to see this being taught in schools, right? You shouldn't need a law degree, a journalism degree, or a union with a research department and an organizing department behind you helping you do this. Like, people should really know how to do this, and that information, that education should be right. We want a presumption that information about wages and working conditions are releasable under FOIA. Too often we have companies saying that this is a trade secret that cannot be released. And we're actually litigating a case right now with Kawasaki and the MTA. Kawasaki is supplying all of those new subway cars to the MTA. They have committed to this U.S. employment plan where they said they were going to pay certain levels of wages and working conditions. We submitted a FOIA to the MTA to say, hey, what did they commit to? Are they living up to it? And Kawasaki said it was a trade secret and everything has been redacted. And we're now in court trying to prove that this is not and should not be a trade secret. And we would like a presumption that it's not, so we don't have to litigate it.
Yeah, and I'll just end with, repeating two things. One thing that I said before is that, this process is really hard, and I do think that there needs to be more education out there, right, for the everyday person just going around, everyday worker trying to figure this stuff out. I mean, I think it's really incredibly important. But the other thing, too, is to really getting the agencies talking together. I know Natalia and I kind of talked about this when we were prepping, because our legal minds were just like, ooh, this is a lot of impact litigation that can happen here now. But I do think that's the next step, right, is really pulling all of this together and having the agencies talk to each other a lot easier, because then it makes our job a lot easier on the outside to continue to push.
And with that, thank you all so very much for joining us this morning and for providing your wisdom and expertise. And I think I'm handing it off to Terry. Okay.
You guys can stay, we're good.